Welcome to Specific Love. In this video, I'm showing you how I built a heavy-duty yet simple table that is burnt to perfection. Let's begin. Now to build this project, I'm going to be using just some standard 2x6x10 lumber that you can pick up at most big box stores. And the reason why I'm going with the 10-foot long lengths is this table desk is going to be roughly 5 feet wide. So I can cut down on costs, also cut down on scrap and waste left over from the boards. And if by chance you don't have a vehicle to transport a 10-foot long board, just remember most of your home improvement stores will be happy to cut these to the length that you'd like. Also remember to spend that extra time picking out the best boards available, because that'll save you a lot of time in a shop. Now in the process of cutting, if you realize you have a large crack going through your wood, this is the time to glue it up. So fill that up with the glue, clamp it together, and give it at least overnight to dry. Now once we have the wood cut to length, we can push it together and we can see that there's a few small gaps along this edge. And that's partially due from the factory cuts. Also, there is slight round over the factory puts on all the wood so that it has a nice smoother finish to it. We want to eliminate that and have this fit as close together. And to do that, we're going to use a table saw to cut 1/8 to 1/4 inch off each side. And now when we push these together, that's a lot better. Next up is to lay out the boards and come up with the best design that you would like. Try to minimize any knots or holes, put those on the bottom primarily, and just make it look as nice as possible. It's also a good idea to try to alternate the pattern of the grain of the wood so it minimizes any warpage in the future. Now that I have it laid out exactly the way I want it, I'm actually going to flip all of these upside down and make sure I keep them on my bench. The reason why is my bench is nice and flat, and I'm going to use that as a reference for the top. Next up, I'm going to grab a carpenter square and I'm going to make several reference points all the way across all of the boards. That way I know exactly where everything lines up and how everything will be assembled. Now I'm making these lines about every 8 to 9 inches apart, but if you accidentally put it in the wrong place, take some isopropyl alcohol, put it on a paper towel, and you can easily wipe away those pencil marks. Now for this table, I'm going to be using a biscuit joiner to assemble everything. You do not need a biscuit joiner to do this project. In fact, you can just lay everything straight and flat on your flat surface and glue everything there. But this will help eliminate any twists or turns or warpage that is in the wood to make it a little bit easier and a little bit faster for me. And if you're using a biscuit joiner, remember to take some sandpaper and to gently knock off any burrs that might be sticking up so it doesn't create extra space in between your wood. Now once we have everything glued, we're going to clamp it together, make sure everything stays nice and flat, but we're also going to put a couple of shims or little pieces of wood at the ends of each clamp, and that way it doesn't mess up the edge of the table. Another alternative to using a biscuit joiner would also be the pocket hole jig. This is great to assemble wood, especially if you need to do it along the edge. Now after you've given it some time to dry, it's a good idea to knock out some of this glue squeeze out with a chisel or something else just to get rid of the bulky stuff. Now that we have most of the bulky glue cleaned up, I want to clean up these edges. When we were aligning everything, we got these really straight, but if you run your finger across the edges here, you'll see that there's a little unevenness. So we're going to take a long straight edge, we're going to clamp it down, then we're going to use a circular saw to make a couple passes over this to make it nice and smooth. Now the first cut's going to be kind of shallow so we can reduce any kind of tear out, and then the second cut is going to be the full depth. I always find it interesting when you make certain cuts how much twist there actually is in the wood. And that's what we're trying to eliminate by alternating the grain of the wood. Now here comes the long and boring part of this build. Sanding. Yes. Now since we used a biscuit joiner, or at least in my case, I have this relatively smooth already. There's no major offsets of the wood. But even with those, you can still run your finger across it and you can feel a bunch of imperfections. So we need to take a hand sander, a palm sander, a hand plane, whatever you would like, and you need to go across this as best you can to get it nice and smooth. Now I'm actually going to be using a new tool that I have. It's a drum sander. To make this a little bit faster, you do not have to have a drum sander for this build, but I'm going to be using it just to speed this process up. Next up, we're going to take a palm router with a round over bit. We're going to go around all of the edges to smooth it all out. Now to try to minimize some of the tear out around this corner here, I added some tape around the edge. Now if you don't have a router, you can use a bow sander. In fact, you could make yourself a bow sander. I made a video on how to make 5 different versions of this. I'll put a link to that in the description below. Now the next step of this table is to actually burn it. I want it to give it that charred look on the top and on the sides. But before I do that, I want to attach the legs. And the reason why is that way I can set it outside and move it around, and I don't have to worry about it falling over. It'll support itself. Now the legs I'm going to be using are just going to use a simple bracket that screw into the table, and then the legs themselves just screw into those brackets. If you're interested in these legs and these brackets, I'll put a link to those in the description below. We're going to have the legs spaced in about 3 inches from each side. Now before we flip the table over, I want to actually burn this underside here just so you don't see the bottom lip. And to do that, I'm going to stick another piece of wood here and then torch this bottom edge. And that should protect these mounts and the table legs. Here's a little tip when you're burning your wood. Whenever you're burning, it's a good idea to start off of one side and make an even, slow stroke going back and forth, moving over just a little bit at a time. Don't sit and try to rock your flame back and forth over the wood. Otherwise you can get little blotchy spots all around where it stops, because it just has that little more time to sit in that one spot and gets overly heated and burns little spots. But if you can keep it going back and forth real evenly, you should get a nice clean burnt finish. Now that we have it all burned, I'm going to put a polyurethane finish across the entire thing to protect it and just to keep any kind of stains that might happen when you put drinks on it. Now that we've given some time for the polyurethane to dry, I'm going to go over really lightly with 400 grit sandpaper. All I'm trying to do is knock down any of the little fibers that are now sticking up, because we want to make this to be a nice smooth finish. It's pretty smooth right now because the burn marks and everything we did it took care of a lot of those little fibers, but there's still a little bit here and there. But just remember, do this really lightly because you do not want to scuff up any of the burn marks. Then we want to wipe it down with a dry towel to remove any kind of dust and residue and put on one more layer. And there you have it, an awesome looking table, desk, whatever you want to use this for. And every time your friends come over, they're going to be impressed that you built it yourself. Now do remember, I did use some larger tools to build this exact table, but as aforementioned, you can use much simpler items and easier processes to come up with pretty much the same exact design. So don't worry about not having the large tools. You can do this still with simple tools. Now I hope you got inspired by this and you can get out in your shop, you can have fun building. You have a large crack, jig to make all your joint all your wood. Overnight time to dry. Wow, I can't talk right now. All the edges. The leg is simply simple as